and there was like this big pride parade, and two of my friends were heavily involved in it, and they like really pulled me in, and I was like, oh, this was my first touch point, and I was so undereducated, I realized. And then they put in their heart and soul to educate me on, like how can I be the best ally for the community. And I still have to learn so much. So it's like I'm always very impressed by how, people from the community come in and, they come in and sit you down and they educate you, especially when you're undereducated. And I feel I am one of them. So guys, feel free to like educate me or anybody at MBA and beyond you feel are undereducated while we are helping you with your MBA applications as we are going forward from here. So you're all welcome to join the community. I'll drop the link in a bit as we are going through the process. And now I'd like you to know who Eric really is. So Eric, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Who I really am. I didn't know who I was pretending to be. Okay, so my name is Eric Macrezia. I'm originally from New York. I've lived in a bunch of places in Spain and Australia, and for the last 14 years already, wow, I've been in Paris, France. So bonjour. And I have been working in education for the last 22 years. So I'm older than I look, I'm 47. And I have been working as a full-time admissions consultant, mostly working with MBA and master's applicants for the last 3-4 years. I myself am a gay cis man, and I'm very involved in a lot of militant, as they say, or activism activities, opportunities to help people trying to find their way. As Lauren said, especially in these times where politically a lot of places in the world are seeming to get more complicated, or perhaps less friendly, more polarized at least. And also in a time where artificial intelligence is really been being embraced. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but finding your real authentic voice in these times, I think that's super important. That's exactly what schools are looking for. And if, being an LGBT or queer person is part of your story, then I definitely encourage you to talk about that. And that could actually result in some scholarships. There's a lot of avenues to get additional scholarships, which is definitely helpful in this expensive investment in your career. As I like to say, turning your diversity into dollars. So while there's no guarantees about that, there's definitely a lot of avenues to go, and we'll talk about that today.
Thanks a lot, Eric. And like you rightly said, that's what business schools are looking for, to be as authentic as possible in your story. And we should not shy away from really letting ourselves out, especially to business schools, because they really want to know you in and out as much as possible. As much as about, like there has to be a sweet balance between your professional journey and your personality. And if this is a part of your personality, do not shy away about talking about it. And MBA and Beyond really helps all our candidates with ROMBA applications. If you're not aware of it, we'll touch upon it later. People coming from the community, there's something called Reaching Out MBA. You should research that a little bit, go out later, see a lot of schools are partnered with ROMBA. And we've helped a lot of our candidates bag ROMBA scholarships up to $25K US. Some of them even have bagged multiple scholarships, so you don't have to just restrict yourself to one scholarship, but you can go for more. But we'll touch upon that a little later. Now, I'd like Shantanu to address the audience a little bit before we can start with the questions that we...
I'll be quick. Hey guys, I'm Shantanu. I'm the founder of MBA and Beyond. Also the head consultant over here. I'm an INSEAD grad, 2017 December batch. Over there, I was also closely connected with OutSead, the community. The president of OutSead was a very good friend, and also the reason why in all these years personally helped people from community get into top-notch of these schools. While helping them, I kind of realized sometimes it's difficult. I mean, my first applicant, it took my applicant 6 calls to let me know. So since then, one of the initiatives that MBA and Beyond, as MBA and Beyond, we are doing is continue organizing such events and helping everyone know that we as MBA and Beyond, we support the community, and we would actually love to help. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Shantanu. I think we can start with a few questions that we received from the participants today at the back end. And as we are flowing, guys, feel free to ask your questions, raise your hands. We want it to be an interactive session. But I'll start with the first question, and maybe Eric, Lauren, whoever feels like jumping in, you can answer. How can LGBTQ applicants navigate the MBA admissions process? Is there any difference? So over to both of you to answer that.
Lauren, do you want to start or do you want me to?
Up to you. I think you can go first. Good with me.
Okay. So the question was, how can LGBTQ plus applicants navigate the process, and is there any difference? I say at the first level, no. I mean, it's the same for everyone, right? Schools are, of course, looking for talented professionals with a certain amount of experience that show a lot of potential that also fit into their community. Every school really has their own culture. I think a lot of people, when they're first doing their research, one of the things they look at is rankings, right? And so people have their eyes on maybe top 10 or M7 or whatever they may be. But there's also huge differences within those schools. And we've done a webinar before. We were talking about one of the schools here in France. And just here in the Paris region, there's a bunch of great business schools, and each of them have such a different culture among each other. And so it's super important that you really go deep into the research to make sure that you're going to feel comfortable. If you are a queer person, that you have a good sense of there's a community that is going to be supportive of you at the faculty, staff, and student level. And that involves, of course, talking to people, right? And most of the information you can learn in any MBA program, you can find online, often for free, in YouTube videos and books and Coursera kind of stuff. It's all about the people with whom you're studying. It's the fantastic professors, it's the alumni network, and it's the corporate partners. And it's all of those things that you're building close relationships with. So while talking with them, find out what goes on campus. You may have a sense of what's a certain business school's culture might be like based on where they're located, right? You might think, okay, somewhere in New York or California is going to be super liberal, super open for LGBT people, and somewhere in Midwest might not be, but you can often be very surprised. Like Texas McCombs is famously super LGBT friendly. And on a country level as well, maybe you think, I don't know what you think, but perhaps you think that France or the UK is very open, or maybe not. I mean, it really is going to depend on the school, what kind of a culture they've cultivated there. Obviously, you can look to see what kind of student organizations there are, like Rainbow Alliances or Queer Alliances or LGBT clubs, and what activities they do. And you can also look to alumni, especially on LinkedIn, and see what kind of careers they've had afterwards. But often you can tell from what groups they belong to, and looking at LinkedIn, what other volunteer work they do, to get a sense of like how involved are they, how much a part of their identity as a person and as a professional is also their career identity. So I'll let Lauren take over from there.
Yeah, so I think there's like two parts, right? I think kind of what Eric was getting on was one, just culture fit. So like looking into programs, like Eric said, in the end of the day, each program is much more nuanced than we think. Like, yes, obviously they're all great schools and stuff, right? But I think like, especially depending how much you want to be in touch with the community, your own upbringing, right? And your own familiar with it, I think that impacts where you want to go. Like, for instance, and just an example, like UT Austin, who's actually like Austin itself is a very, very liberal, like queer city. Again, there's always safe spots in college, but especially with the environment in the US, you might want to consider like that's something you want just in your community, or if you want in general across the whole, like in your own school community or across in general. So I think that's one, just in like terms of which schools that fit for you, does that fit with you and your identity first of all, right? Then number two, I think in terms of writing it in the essay, again, I think both Eric and I are hitting on this. Or actually, prior to you were hitting this too. In the end of the day, like, these schools are looking for a story on you, right? If it's an important part of you, write about that. Like, I wrote about it because it is an important part of me. Like, I'll give you an example. When I applied, I wanted to do entertainment specifically in business. It is business entertainment, right? And a part of it was telling stories. That's actually why I love doing stories now. But it's like I like entertainment because of the ability to tell stories. And I think underrepresented stories, like queer stories, need to be told more, right? So there is a very personal connection about like my own story and the fact that these stories need to be elevated. So I think that worked out really well. I actually did have a lot of leadership experience again within the LGBT community through my sorority. So that was what helped a lot. I talked about how I built a lot of business skills, volunteering. Now, I think what's key here is you don't fake that either, right? Like, if you don't have involvement, you didn't really, right? I think it's almost in some ways like, there's a lot of school essays have like the part about diversity. You talk about how your own experience and how you want to also like, maybe explore that more. That could be actually your story. I think the key thing here is staying authentic with it. Don't overextend it, right? Just because you're an ally. That's great. By the way, if you're generally an ally, you've been involved, great. But don't be like, I'm an ally. It's like, what have you done? Nothing. Then don't write about that. Like, in that fact, then don't try to like up your LGBTQ credit in the grand scheme of things. So that's my personal thoughts.
Thanks. That's very valuable from both of you. So I can give an example of one of the candidates, and I think there's some schools like Eric mentioned who really embrace and were very, very active. Fuqua is one of them as well. They heavily talk about diversity in Seattle also, it is one of their values. And examples like these can definitely add to the values that are important to business school when it comes to diversity. So if you've not been engaging in activities as of now, and you're going to a business school maybe in a year or two, I strongly encourage you to be a part at work or outside of work where you can, take more leadership, bring in more leadership examples where you're supporting the community so that you can add more meat to your application. And I don't think it'll look like you're making that up because you were genuinely involved in the welfare of the community. So thanks for that. And next, Shantanu, do you have any points to add? All right, so we can move on to the next question.
I
Meanwhile,
wonder if it's possible, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but before you address that question, I wonder if it's possible to poll the audience to get a sense of where they're targeting. They're looking more in North America or in Europe, Asia. Do you have that functionality, or is there a way to do that? Maybe people can just respond in the chat.
yeah, I think people can respond in the chat right now. I wish I could have put off like a poll or something, but I can do it meanwhile as we're. But guys, feel free to respond to what is your target country, schools maybe that you're looking at, so we get a sense check of what are we dealing with today. So okay, North America, mostly US, I see. Yeah, please go on.
I mean, just to add to the reason why I asked that is because, Fuqua is a great example. Macomb is a great example. New York and California, of course, they're a great example. So, NYU Stern, they're really strong in this area. I've been on campus. I've seen their LGBT club. I've interacted with them. Berkeley, Stanford, Kellogg as well. And then if you're looking at Europe, I mean, we can't forget Imperial College Business School. They've been really killing it with all their activism. London Business School, where they host something similar to ROMBA. So that was reaching out MBA. It's called You're Out. So like Europe, but you're out.
Yeah.
It's a student-run organization based at London Business School, but they have a conference annually as well, and they involve people from business schools all over Europe, and I believe they're reaching out to the States as well. You mentioned INSEAD, but Bocconi and Oxford, they're also great with support. So there's a lot of schools that really do not only have strong networks that provide support, but also provide scholarships that are in-house, let's say.
Thanks, Eric. So I hope we are all jotting down the names of the schools that Eric just mentioned for the reasons, of course, known. We have a question here, and I think we'd like to pause to answer Anoop's question first before we can jump on to the next one. I can read it out loud. Anoop says, I'm from Kerala. Kerala is a state in India. Here the queer students are being cyberbullied, and the colleges who enroll the queer are being harassed. That's why I'm planning to enroll into some universities in Europe. Also, it's not more like a question, it's a reason why Anoop is wanting to go out. And I will just validate that it's not just you. A lot of people move to switch countries to more, pride or LGBTQ plus friendly countries. And I feel that's a genuine reason to be switching countries or pivoting, your career to a direction that's more friendly and also embraces you as a whole person and not just your resume. That's just my thoughts. Eric, Lauren, do you want to add anything to that, to what Anoop mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, there's more LGBT friendly countries, but I'll say you could break it down to states or even cities, to the point that Lauren and I were both touching on about Texas and Austin. So U of T, and I'm not working for U of T by any means, but Texas McCombs, they're based in Austin, which they refer to Austin as the little blue dot in the big red state, right? So what that American lingo means, it's a typically conservative Republican state, and Austin is it's a big city within this huge state, right? You may want to think about, how do state laws affect you? If we look at what happened last year with the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, which removed the protection for right to access female reproductive abortion and so forth, it fell upon the state's powers to decide that. So now there's a whole bunch of states where it's illegal if you need that kind of care, and others where you have that right and protection. Who knows what could happen with the Supreme Court if they decide to attack, equal right to marry, for example. So it's a difficult time. So even though you may have a school that's super supportive, where does that school exist? In what state are they? And I'm sorry to hear that you or your friends have been cyberbullied in Kerala. That unfortunately can happen anywhere, right? So
thanks, Eric. We can take up Anshul's question. So Anshul wants to know, do we have a certain percentage of states exclusively saved for DEI candidates during admissions in top B schools, especially in EU? Or is it the same pool as all? Anybody wants to take this one? Yeah.
I would say the same. Like there's no reservations per se, but you can try to see that some schools have DEI as one of their values, like I mentioned earlier. And if you do go heavy on those values, then naturally your application is more matchable to the values of that respective business schools. But yeah, Lauren, you can feel free to jump in, chime in your thoughts.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I think like you cannot think about it that way, right? I think that's like actually like the fear of business schools right now. It's like they don't want to think about like, oh, just because you're black, you're automatically smart, right? Like in fact, I would say that the whole thing that's a really contested thing in the States right now is there's a word for it. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Affirmative action, right? So that's not actually a thing in the. It's not instilled across this country. And like, again, talk about like where's my like? Do I get a thought? Again, think about your story as a whole. That's what I always tell my all my clients. Because in the end of the day, like to be fair, you're not the only gay person applying, right? Or not the only queer person applying. But how has your queer experience actually helped you in becoming the leader you are today, or what you want to do? I think that's where you have to think about. Like, how has that formed you as a person? In general, that's what these applications are asking for. Is like you as a person, your story. And so again, I think instead of like saying like, oh, like how is that going to help me with like a special advantage? No, just think about how does that form you as a person, and why does that create the story that who you are today? And I think that's a more important way to look at it. Why is this an important thing for you to talk about? Otherwise, it's not important. Don't talk about it. You know, if you're like, I'm just gay. Like, by the way, there's a lot of gay people with that. I'm just gay and I don't want to talk anything about that. Like, I'm just queer. You know, I don't have any like part in that. Like, then don't try to make it more, right? Like, if it is important and how it's formed you, talk about it for sure.
Yes. And I want to like, add on to what you just said, and also respond a little bit more to Anshal's question. So affirmative action, right? This is an attempt in the United States, goes back to, I think, the 60s or 70s, to sort of correct some of the wrongs that previous generations have made with respect to slavery, with respect to racism and discrimination and all these horrible things that happen. And the U.S. Supreme Court last summer also struck that down. It was the two big U.S. affirmative action, and specifically affirmative action when it comes to college admissions, including MBA admissions. And the two schools that were part of this lawsuit were Harvard and UNC Kenan-Flagler. So they were at the center of this. And schools fight tooth and nail to have as much diversity as possible, right? So they have had to become very creative in finding other ways to attract that kind of diversity and to be sure to keep that balance. There's an organization I belong to called AGAG. It's the Association of Graduate Admissions Consultants, International Graduate Admissions Consultants. We had a conference just a couple of weeks ago. We met with the admissions director from Harvard, from Kenan-Flagler, from Duke, and so forth. And they were very vocal about all the different strategies they're doing to get as much diversity as possible. I also want to point out that diversity, or DEI as Anshul states, is different things in different places. In the United States, diversity, equity, inclusion often refers to race and so forth, whereas in the rest of the world, it may have to do with national origin. Countries like France, for example, it is actually illegal to keep statistics on race. So there is no data about this. It's an attempt to maintain equality, but I also feel like they bury their head in the sand about the lack of it. So what I want to say to Anshul after saying all that is that it's not just you, Anshul. I think a lot of people sort of really want to crack the code and figure out how many seats there are, what's their percentage of getting in, and like, if I get this GMAT, what am I going to get? Please, everyone in this room, stop thinking this way. Stop trying to figure out how to game the system. It's not going to work for you. It's just not going to. How many seats there are not a certain number of seats. They want as much diversity as possible. The way to get into these schools is to be authentic. And like Lauren was saying, if like being a queer person is very central to your story, in other words, it's not just a piece of who you are, but it's something that informs every decision you make. It informs like what you do. You are part of an organization that's very active, in whether it's activism or it's in the arts or whatever, then yeah, talk about it, because it is a big part of your story. But just because you are gay doesn't necessarily mean that it's worth describing in your essays. So I hope that gives a little bit more context and breadth to the answer.
Thanks, Eric, Lauren. I see a bunch of questions coming in they're more like profile based. So because of the agenda of the session, let's stick to what we're discussing today. While if we have time at the end of the session, then we are happy to take up your questions, which are more related to profile evaluations. Meanwhile, I'm going to drop a link for the profile evaluation at MBA and Beyond. You can have a 45-minute chat just around your profiles with alums of some of the top business schools. The team will map you to that. So I'll take up Saksham's question because that's very relevant to the topic we're discussing. Saksham's checking, do universities see LGBTQ plus candidate just for their aim to make a social impact for the community in return in future, or general leadership goals are valued as well in tech, in finance, etc. Lauren, Eric, do you wanna? And that is also a very similar question we've gotten asked by the candidates, like how can we showcase our examples in leadership when it comes to the community? Do you both want to answer this one?
I mean, the benefit of the question, like you're asking, is it as important as the leadership skills and the hard skills? No, they're looking for people who are bright, motivated, talented, who show a lot of potential. That is core to being admitted. At the same time, they want to maintain a level of diversity, because study after study for decades has shown with companies that the more diverse your teams are, it drives more revenue, it mitigates loss. It's it's all different ways of thinking combined that help companies be more and more successful. Following that example, business schools have taken on that same philosophy that diversity is a strength. And so as they are feeders for companies, or even gatekeepers, if you want to look at it that way, they work very hard to have as much diversity as possible. So you need both, you know?
Right, I can actually jump in over here. So there was this study that happened, and what they did was they picked up a few traders, and then there were like a bunch of traders where the background was kind of similar, and then another set of traders where background was pretty diverse. At the moment, we can actually define the skill percentage and the percentage. And what the study, finally what came out was that diverse people together actually shared higher skill percentage than the others. So what business schools or what any professional agency, what they're looking for is, you're working together as a team with higher skill level. That's exactly where diversity helps. So that's why business schools are looking for it. Having said that, everyone is equal, in the eyes of school, and especially in the top companies. What really matters is how deserving you are as a candidate, than from where you're coming from.
Thanks.
Also, a little bit more color to add, like, I think maybe the person was asking, how active do you have to be? Like, our school's looking for LGBTQ people to be active in a LGBT visible role, and not necessarily, like, they absolutely respect your privacy. Like, if you're not out, whether in your personal life, family, or at work or whatever, that's totally fine. You don't have to be a very public facing your person to benefit from your diversity, to be admitted, or to get a scholarship. And I had a good chat yesterday with Jeet, who hopefully will join us a little bit. He is currently working at BCG in New York. He's from India, and he's a ROMBA recipient. He graduated from NYU Stern MBA. Sorry, can't speak. But he was telling me about his experience, and I asked him that very question. Is it expected that you're very public about your sexual orientation? And he said, no, not at all. You apply through ROMBA, and you have a profile, and they ask you, are you going to be like out, so to speak? And that is communicated to the schools. There's sort of like, they play this intermediary role. Like, you can choose to, and they encourage you to, but there's no pressure, and the decision is not at all based on if you're going to be out or not. So for whatever reason you may have, whether it be family, religion, or whatever personal reason, there's no obligation to be out. ROMBA also does an annual conference, and they do ask that you, like, if there's any LGBT applicants, as a fellow, it's a fellowship, right? So as a ROMBA fellow, you're asked to speak about your experience to these applicants. So it's more on a one-to-one basis, and to encourage them to apply through this channel and to attend the conference, where your fees for attending and travel accommodations are covered. It sounds really interesting, great for networking, great for getting a job afterwards, and a lot of fun.
Thanks, Eric. All right, moving on to next question. Neeraj asking, I'm a later bloomer and accepted my sexuality quite late in life, hence haven't been able to contribute towards the betterment of the LGBTQ community. How can I still add value in my applications? Do you want to comment on that, Eric, Lauren?
I mean, without getting into a consultation, like, my thought is, like, how did being a late bloomer contribute to who you are today, and how you've contributed to your personal life, your job, and so forth? Like, what is the relationship with that? Like, I think what's a good way to see this, if you're applying as an LGBTQ person, to first think about your career. your life, your pathway, your education, your career, your leadership, the impact, all that kind of stuff. Look at that as the first important thing, right? And then apply that lens of also being a queer person and see how has that influenced things? How has that shaped things? Has that been a major factor or not? And depending on how that lands, if there's a really interesting story to tell about, for example, the question we just received, I was a late bloomer, I haven't, and so forth. Did that shape something, a decision that you made, or something that you did for someone else, or some kind of impact you had at the company? Then this is something worth talking about. And if not, not every gay person needs to write about their sexuality. Lauren, please take it.
Again, I just think how does it pertain to you as a person in your story, right? I don't think it's like if, for instance, one way, let's say like you're a late bloomer, right? It's like you can write about that in the diversity portion and be like, actually, I didn't put a huge emphasis, but then me coming to my sexuality made me realize that I want to do more, right? I'm just saying, like, how does it influence? And that's just one example. Think about why that, I think that how it influences your decision, and what that means is really just like, how does it fit in the story? Right? Who am I presenting? How does that fit into the decision I made? Maybe it's like that's one of the reasons I want to go to the US, and one of the things I want to experience more, right? Is like I want to be more involved with the queer community, and actually knowing that this program is like very big into it, that's why I'm interested in your program. That's actually a key reason why you're my number one choice.
Yeah. I will also just say, as Laura was talking about how I want to and I will do and so forth. If you're going to talk about anything that's in the future in your essays, make it sound credible. Like, talk about specific examples, concrete things that you plan to do, maybe some people you've already reached out to put that in motion, because otherwise it's just talk.
Yep. I'd just like to add, whatever you say that you want to do in the future as well, if you haven't done anything so far, make sure at least you have an example or two to support. If you don't have, then at least from application perspective, try to steer clear from it. You can just draw a line or a sentence around it. Don't try to go heavy on it, because they are looking for supporting evidences to bolster whatever you're saying that you want to do in the future. Whether it's your post-MBA goals or how you want to support the community, you can talk about your aspirations, but do talk about the examples. And if you don't have, then let's talk about something else instead. And that's what I would do if I were an applicant. Okay, so let's look at, I can see a lot of questions are going much deeper in the profiles. We have shared the profile evaluation link with you, but I'm going to ask the team to send you link to G's calendar directly so you can book his calendar slot for 30 to 45 minutes. He can really guide you with respect to how it works with ROMBA and any other fellowship that you really want to apply for. And later, if you guys, of course, want to work with MBA and beyond, and if you really see Lauren and Eric becoming your partners in this journey to MBA, then we're happy to onboard you there on. But yes, first step is you have to get your profile evaluated. We really have to see where you stand and how good a profile are we together to work for top business schools. All right, let's take up Bhargav's question. He's saying, being an open gay person and from a conservative family in India, I had my share of challenges while growing up, which badly impacted my academics, career decisions. But I'm visible and vocal at workplace who strive to promote DEI. Do I have a chance to get into top business schools like INSEAD, HEC, Oxford, etc.? Just from this, at least for me, it's not possible to say that you will get an admit, but if you have a chance, again, Eric, Lauren, Shantanu, do you want to chime in? We need a GMAT, GRE score, we need...
Yeah. I have a lot of, what do you mean academic? There's so many things. Work experience years, what companies have you been working for? Okay, you did bad at academics. What do you mean by that? In the meantime, is your GRE and GMAT score enough to make up for your academic? Too many questions, Matthew. It really depends, I think you need to get those basics covered first before you think about just the queer part and stuff. And you can talk about that in your struggles and maybe how that helped you build your resilience, how you came back stronger. But, also, again, I also remind all my clients this. Story is important, but you need to have the meat and bones, right? If you don't have a decent GMAT, GRE score, especially, let me be real, especially coming from India, which is such a competitive market, if you don't have a decent GMAT, GRE score, if you don't have somewhat decent work experience and academic experience, I think the academic experience is probably the one that's, your best chance of, kind of going, okay, I didn't do well academically, but you have to make up for that in, strong GRE and GMAT. Because, again, just remember, you're coming from a field that's super competitive. Something I kind of learned as I work with more Indian clients. It's a different level of competitive because everyone has such good test scores and stuff. So you got to make sure those bases are covered, then top of that.
Totally agree. Story is very important, but you need to have that, what'd you call it? Meat and potatoes, meat and bones, something like that. You know, you need to reassure the admissions committee that you can handle their academics, the rigor of the program, and that you're going to be a strong applicant for the job. All they want to know is not that you're going to just be a good student, that you're going to be hireable, that you're, and there is a direct correlation to people who have poor GMAT scores or test waivers sometimes that do poorly in some of the tougher courses like finance. And they don't want people dropping out and failing out. So they don't want to set people up for failure. So yeah, if your coming out process was challenging, as it is for many people, and that has affected your academics, then you need to compensate for that with a stronger test score. That's really all there is to it. And in terms of story and essay, like one thing I just want to bring up is what's become talked about is the trauma essay. And the trauma essay is like, the concept is that you feel compelled to tell a story that is kind of on the dramatic side, like something major happened to me and I survived it, right? And it's become so popular that it's become like a trope, right? The admissions officers are kind of bored. This is the feedback I'm hearing from the admissions directors all the time. I mean, we're kind of bored of hearing the trauma essay all the time. I don't want to diminish anyone's pain or anyone's, struggles. And if it is something that, as the coming out process, or just being an LGBT person, for whatever reason or thing that you experienced, is something that you do want to talk about it, you have to find a way that doesn't come off as like, for me, oh my God, I suffered, let me into this school or give me money. Like, it's not going to work out well. You have to find a way to take that challenge that happened to you and talk about how it helped shape who you are and the decisions you've made and the actions you've taken. And
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially, especially in the queer community. Like, let's be real. First of all, every human has experienced trauma, and it's been obviously, like you say, it's multiplied in our community, right? Of course, we all, the very basic, I was explaining to my straight friends, at the very basic minimum, no matter where you come from, like, you're told that you're not the norm, right? So we all have a trauma, and that doesn't, it's like kind of like saying, oh, I have a mental health disease. That doesn't excuse you for like just everything, right? It's the part that we want to hear as a story, right? And like in the admissions, how did you overcome that? How did that part of you, like, okay, being queer, I went through this, but that made me stronger. And and anything like for the one question originally, right? I think you're saying that you now strive to do that. That's great, but again, the both gotta be covered first. You have to have your basics covered to cover the fact that you can hang academically, and then you can definitely use that in the story. Be like, this is why I pursue it. That's actually why MBA matters to me. Like, I want to advocate for this, especially if it's like one of my goals is to be a DEI leader, right? Perfect, almost, right? So again, we get to think about that all, like, not just trauma. Fear by trauma, what else? It's like, okay, how do you overcome that? How do you still become a strong leader to fight that or because of that?
Absolutely. Thank you, both of you. I think we can touch upon Harsh's question. It's a longish question. We can touch upon the first context first. My general concerns around the application as a queer person revolve around schools in UK, US, and EU, familiarity with the Indian context, misinterpretation of experiences. That's point number one. He's talking about experiences that are deeply impactful in an Indian context may not be fully appreciated or understood by admissions committees. Do we want to comment on that first before I jump onto the second part of the question? Yeah. Yes, Sean.
Actually, that is true, irrespective of where you're coming from. That's, it's similar to all the people who are coming from India. Having said that, it's the way you tell a story, right? That's it.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is actually something that I deal with. Like, 'cause I also have Taiwanese clients, and gay stuff is fine there, by the way, so that's not a problem. But like for them, it's like something going against the norm, right? Is very different for them. So I actually tell them to kind of preface that, like it's purposely lean into that, right? Like, while this might not be leadership, this might not be resistant in a lot of Western context, and admit that. Which, by the way, when you do that, that shows you have a lot of awareness and you do a lot of reflection, right? If you know like what your part is, and you're not diminishing what you've done, you're not letting other people tell you what you've done is wrong. That's actually quite powerful. I think that's actually something Americans are very good at. Like, oh, all you do is build this or whatever, right? But Americans are very good at telling their story. So it's like, so you can actually, again, I would just also personally put that as like a preface, like, while this might not seem like very high DEI action in India, and in the States or in like in Western cultures, it is a different story here, and that's why. And back to the DEI question, like, and that's why the little resistance like this. I need more resources to do more or whatever, right? I think that's you lean into that. Actually, I learned that actually. Never try to take it as like oh my God, it's hard to me. It's like lean into the thing that you think is your weakness. Actually,
also just reading Harsh's question, misinterpretation of experiences, I can imagine that it can be difficult, coming from somewhere else and you're applying to a school in a different country and concerned that they're not going to get it, or the significance of what you did or experienced, how significant that was, how deep that was. My first thought is that, some of these admissions professionals, many of them have been doing this for decades, and you're for sure not the first Indian to apply to that school. So they've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of applications of people coming from where you come from, and many of whom are also LGBT. So that could be reassuring. Second thing is, if you're ever going to another country, whether it's to get a job, to get a degree, to find love, whatever you want to do, it's up to you to explain yourself. You're the fish out of water, right? So this is where story comes into place, and telling a really good story. As an educator, one thing I found myself saying is you got to reach them before you can teach them, right? You have to figure out where they are, what do they understand so far, and then you can, get them to hook in and understand what you want to tell them. In an essay, you don't have the luxury of asking them the question first, right? So you have to find a clear and efficient way to set the baseline and set the context, and then explain your personal story, your particular story. So it's a challenge, but that's what admissions consultants are here for.
Thanks. That was a really good admissions consultant pitch as well, Eric. But yes, I would also say that most of the candidates struggle with storytelling, especially when it comes to very personal parts of our journey. How should we put them together along with our professional journey? And yes, that's where admissions consultant really help. We're going to pause for a little bit because Jeet has just joined us. Even though it's for 17 minutes, but we're really glad that he could make it. Jeet, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience quickly, and then we can jump back into the questions that we've been talking about?
Yes, of course. So thank you so much, Preeti, for having me. And I'm really, really sorry that I'm late. I had a client meeting that was from 9:30 to 10 a.m. in Eastern time, and that ran over by 3 minutes. So every client meeting immediately died. So I'm really, really sorry for being late. Hey everybody, my name is Preet. I'm originally from Mumbai, India. I went to Western Food Business from 2021 to 2023. I'm currently a management consultant working across regional public goods for many of topics, and that's my story. I hope I can be of help in the remaining 16 minutes of this conversation, and I'm excited to jump in wherever I can. So that's all.
Yes, thanks, Jeet. And every one of you who want to have your profile evaluation, I'm going to share Jeet's calendar link in an email after the session, so you can book him for the rest of the week, and he can have long conversations with you about your profiles. All right, so I think we can jump on to the next question at the back that we had, and then we will jump back in here as we are going through the session.
Just wanted to ask.
The third question that we had, we touched upon the leadership experiences. How are we going to talk about that? Third question is, what strategies help build a diverse and inclusive community during an MBA? Eric, Lauren, Jeet, do you want to maybe share your thoughts on that? I think what they're asking is what examples of maybe activities that they can talk about when they're putting their application together when they're at business school. That's
An extracurriculars question, is that what I'm hearing? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's important to include your, first of all, I hate the word extracurriculars. I think it sounds like children, but anyway, I prefer personal interests. Second of all, I think it's important to have this section first in your CV and also have that by extension on your LinkedIn profile. It shapes you as a three-dimensional real human being and not just a two-dimensional piece of paper or screen. So it's useful, whether you're applying for a job or business school, we're in professional mode. We're here as professionals, but we're also human. And guess what? Humans connect shared interests and values. That's culture. And so it's an opportunity. It's a springboard for conversation. It's a way to possibly have something in common with the person who's in front of you, who's reading your CV, right? So I always use the example. It's like, oh, if you're into scuba diving, put that, because if that guy is or girl is too, it's like, oh, that's a really cool thing you have in common. You can have a little side chat about scuba diving, I also tell people, please don't put photography or travel. Everyone with a smartphone is a photographer. So if you're truly into photography, you have probably some kind of niche. If you like, black and white portraiture or landscape photography, put that. Be specific. Put, 3 or 4 things that you truly like. Don't put music. Come on. What'd you figure out Spotify? Congratulations. Like if you play an instrument, if you perform in an orchestra, particularly if you have some kind of leadership role, like you are like the section leader or the conductor of an orchestra or a choir or something like that, you're captain of your football team, that is leadership. And believe me, schools are keenly aware of skills that are on the field that are transferable to the office, like that kind of team kind of thing. So any team sports is really great to put. There's nothing bad about playing, golf or what's another solo sport, tennis. But if you do play anything like hockey, basketball, soccer, American football, whatever, yeah, that's great. Cricket, go here, cricket. Yeah, Lauren.
You're in mute, Lauren. You too.
Yeah, I know. I know. My computer's dying right now, and so everything doesn't work functionally properly. So I'm like, I can't unmute stuff really fast. I kind of done that one. Be specific. Yeah, like if it's relative. Sorry, if it's relative to you and developed you and important part of you, then talk about it. Don't just make up things just to add something on the application, please, ever.
Yeah, I think we can go back to her third question, because I think, Eric, you kind of touched upon the first two parts. The third part is subtlety of activism. I think his concern is many queer Indians engage in subtle forms of activism due to safety concerns, while US, UK schools might not recognize these less visible efforts as significant compared to more overt activism common in Western countries. So how can, basically I think what we, like people coming from India, might worry about, that it is not as big as something that, peers might have done in Amsterdam, where like pride is so big and it's like always accepted and you can go and above and beyond to do anything at Bain, versus what you can do at Bain India is very limited. So how do we approach that? Yeah.
I'd like to answer that with a little story. So there's a book I read a few years ago called Alone in Berlin, right? And it's a story of this couple. They're kind of like a little bit older, maybe late 50s or whatever. And, this is the time where the Nazi regime is there. There's the Secret Service and the Stasi, right? And so it's very dangerous to do. Neighbors are reporting on each other. Everyone's kind of being pressured to like tell on each other. And it's a very scary and paranoid context to live. And this couple decided to do a very courageous move to resist this regime. They were totally aware that this is horrible, like killing people, particularly Jews and gay people and so forth. It was a horrible thing. And so their way of resisting was with these little postcards that they made, and they left all over Berlin, and they dropped them in these places. And even though it seems like a very small act, it was a huge risk. And in the end, they were both caught and killed. So it was like, just as a metaphor for what may seem like a small act to someone else is actually a huge thing. And in the context of, if you're in a place in this world where it's very dangerous to be out, like let's talk about a place like Saudi Arabia, where it's absolutely illegal and you can be put to death, right? Like, so you can't do that. So you do your part. If activism is your thing, and again, storytelling. It is up to you to tell that story and to give that context, to make it clear that the impact you had and the courage that it took to do that kind of activism that matters in your corner of the world.
I totally agree with Eric. I think the deal over here is to not leave it to AdCom to infer what the impact was. You state it pretty explicitly. Yeah, you tell it in a way that, I'm also telling you what the impact was, right? So just referring to his story, if you just say, I wrote letters, full stop. Yeah, it might not seem impactful, right? But if you explain the thing in a proper manner, you subtly explain that, this is exactly what the impact was. I probably helped these many people, right? That's gonna help. And as far as impact is concerned, I don't think impact can be compared in terms of numbers. But if you're coming up with an impact saying that I broke this stereotype, or I broke this hierarchy in bringing the voices of other people, I think it's something that cannot be compared. So don't worry on the front that my impact is going to sound lesser than the others, right? That's just explain it properly.
I'm gonna say, like, I feel like, okay, not to also be like Eric and be like, this is why you need an MBA coach thing, like, no, if you're advertising for that, but like, I think that's like, I always tell my clients that that's exactly what the essay should do. Like you should be thinking about how awesome you are, Like, I always tell my clients, I can't guarantee anything against school. Let me be real. I just don't have that magic crystal ball. I can't wave a wand, and competition is extremely high, right? But I tell my clients, you don't leave, like, working with me, at least personally, like, and you do your application, you don't feel like, wow, I'm proud of my achievements and that I know that I can get to the next step. Like, that, you should be showing that, because if you cannot say that in your essay, why would a school want you, right? And you cannot be proud of what you've done, right? And yeah, like I'm gonna use a very specific example. I actually with a client, and this I think might be relatable for you. I think a lot of Indians. Her essay for like what was the thing you're most proud of? She wrote about being divorced. And I'm sure if you're Indian, you all know how that's like one of the most disgraceful thing to ever do as a woman, especially in India, is to get divorced, right? So like, why would you write about that? It's because it taught her a lot. She talked about how that impacted her, how it's a big deal in India, and how she went against norms, and how she disappointed her family, but why that was important and how that empowered her, right? So again, demonstrate why it's impactful. Because honestly, any day, most of the applicants from the US actually, like I'll be honest, I applied. I was just an analyst. I could have said that. I'm just an analyst at another, entertainment company. I'm one of, at least in my department, 20, which means if like we multiply that, I'm one of 100 at the very minimum, right? Why is that important? What do I do that I feel like is significant? Why is that important? Why should you still take me? That's the key, right? That's the hard part to figure out. Why is it important that I did a little activism? Because you know what? It meant a lot to me, and it should mean a lot, and it's actually a big part to define my country, So I think that's, again, like that's how you have to think about it versus like, why is this, how can I, like, it's not important. No, it is important if you make it important.
No, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Do you want to chime in? Maybe because you're coming from India as well. So yeah.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to say that like not anything, but any fear, faculty or inference, shy you away from sharing what you've actually done or experienced. So even if you join an employee resource group where you were number 3. Sorry, am I not loud enough? Am I not audible?
Yeah, you'd have to be louder than this a little bit.
Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I would say that let not any kind of risk of inference or subtlety make you shy from sharing any experience. So even if you were employee number 3 in an employee resource group of a company that had more than 1,000 employees, don't feel that just because you joined a group that amounts to nothing. The fact that you were employee number 3 or single digits or like one of the first 20 members who joined in an organization that has 1,000 people working for it does not means actually a huge deal. It means you've combated a lot of internal struggles and a lot of fear to actually go ahead and take that step. So I would just say please do not hide any of your experiences just because you think they are too subtle or they're not impactful enough. Just please feel free to find a space to mention it.
Thanks, Ajit. So there's an approach that we follow and all our consultants in Shantanu also swears by, and I'm sure most of you must be aware of it. There's something called STAR approach, and we use STAR I approach when you're telling your story. So a STAR, S goes for situation, T for task, A for action, R for result, and then I goes beyond that. You start talking about impact. And there is a strategy of how much, air should you give to each part. And we do worry that the impact should take up the most space, while you should really demonstrate your situation in as less words as possible. So whenever you're thinking about your impact, maybe try to follow the STAR I approach and try to list everything down and see which one is making most sense with respect to your story and pick that one out. All right, we can take up one more question.
Just before that, Paridhi, just one thing to add over here. So guys, irrespective of what your anecdote is, what your EC is, honestly, all these things are insignificant if you cannot explain why behind it. So the story is the why behind the anecdotes. It's not the anecdotes. So if you can really support the why behind it, even a very simple thing you can write, like for example, my achievement was quitting the job. And you can really write very simple things which you might feel are insignificant. But if you can support the why behind it, you can just completely change. You can spin the entire anecdote and I can spin the entire story.
Yeah. Imagine quitting a job can be an achievement that gets a candidate into INSEAD back in the day. Even now, like somebody who's, it can really bring out a value that you're a risk taker, you're entrepreneurial, and so on and so forth. We've got one last question that we will tackle because we have 3 minutes. After that, if you've got any questions, you can respond to me on my email and then we can take it forward from there. I'm going to drop Jeet's calendar link in here shortly and you will receive an email from me as well. What funding opportunities like the ROMBA scholarship are available for LGBTQ plus applicants? Eric, Lauren, Jeet, do you want to help people list down what opportunities can they avail if they're going to top business schools?
I think ROMBA tends to be the biggest one, to be fair. And then beyond that, looking for private ones, to be honest. And that's there is a whole game with that, you know, like just Googling, searching, to be honest, is like one way. I personally can't think of any other one that stands up to the top of my head except for ROMBA personally. Eric, you might know it more because you're a little bit more in this field, a bit more.
There's one called the Point Foundation. I put it in the chat already. Definitely check that out. They claim to be the largest provider of scholarships for LGBT students, but I'm not sure about all the details or like requirements, but definitely check it out. But I would get on the website for ROMBA and for the Point, like ASCP, get to know your, like, get involved.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools have their own internal scholarships, like
Yeah, private scholarships even.
Gotcha. Give an example of that Wharton has a scholarship called the PRISM Scholarship, which is awarded to one student each year from the LGBTQ community. So do check that out as well. And I'm pretty sure that there are other such scholarships that exist at different little schools. So yeah, your school's website will give you information on that.
All right. And I think we are pretty good. Any 2 cents, last 2 minutes from all of you to the audience? Some of them are targeting round 1, round 2 this year. Some of them already have scores. They are reattempting, and some of them are struggling with getting the test date. So any 2 cents, when and how should they approach their applications if they're really going this year?
I was gonna say something, I guess it's more general, but since being Pride Month, just I think there's a lot of good questions about. Again, I think we can all agree that India probably doesn't have the best LGBT condition compared to some other countries, right? So I just think as you go through this, remember you have now been through that, and you have either had to be closeted, whether you're closeted, whether you've come out, whether you're resisting, right? I think keep in mind this, I love about our community, queer community, is that we're very resilient. We're still alive, we're still thriving. So just use that energy and be an awesome queen, and just do well in your GMAT. You can't be harder than being gay. I don't know. I just personally think it can't be harder than being gay in a country that's where it's illegal. Okay, so you got this. All right, queen. That's I just get saying that.
I love it. And, also, I think, Jeet, we spoke yesterday a bit, and you were talking about, some, career opportunities, which are also really good to point out that ROMBA has, the connections, the relationships they have with so many companies, like MBBs and beyond, like PwC and so forth. So maybe you're a great example of that. Maybe you want to speak more.
Yeah, of course, it's going to be very hard to follow the burden after that shareable advice. But in general, I would say, please connect with the LGBT clubs of the business streams that you are interested in. They have a lot of people that would be very willing and open to talk to you. A lot of companies that you are interested in have LGBT resource too. I personally am a member of Pride at BTG, which has a completely separate recruiting track. In addition to the normal recruiting track that exists for everything before free, you have additional opportunities to meet with the company and interact with them. And there's also an opportunity to meet us at ROMBA, and of course, a lot of additional opportunities for you to make your way and make a good impression. And it's not just to BTG, it's to every other firm there is, whether it's in the consulting industry or not. So please make sure to leverage as many opportunities. Think of this as the revenge of every single time that you were denied an opportunity because you were different. Think of this as the reverse of that. All of those disadvantages are now your superpowers. So make sure to leverage them and do not let anybody give you any guilt or shit. That's going to be my best.
Thank you, everyone. I think it was a wonderful session, and thanks everyone for staying till the end. Hoping to work with some of you to get you into some of the top business schools and bag you the fellowships that you deserve the best. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Shantanu.
Cheers,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Don't be a drag, just be clean.
Ciao, ciao.
Yeah.